This is a topic that I've been intrigued by for as long as I can remember, because quite frankly, I've never understood the culture of tipping. It's this societal pressure that says I have to rate your service based on how I feel at any given moment. But in the window in which I receive my bill and I have to determine how much I think you're worth based on a percentage of what I can potentially offer you, like some people have different levels of affordability. Some people are having a bad day and decide to give you nothing. Some people, are very wealthy and decide to overcompensate for, I guess, others who might not compensate you fairly. It's such a mixed pseudoscience of trying to make this determination of paying someone's wage when ultimately they should just be paid fairly. So I'm interested to see this take. I'm going to give my input as the video goes on, but I've moved to Finland. There's no tipping here. And people work in restaurants as waiters and waitresses, service people, and they never once question the idea. It's not a part of their thought process. You just see a price, and even if there's tax involved, tax is worked in and printed onto the menu. You don't have to do any calculations. You see the price of the thing, you pay the price of the thing. There's no like, oh, I thought this service wasn't very good, so I'm not going to tip. There's none of that. You just have people who serve you and they do the best job that they can, and it doesn't matter how well they do because at the end of the day, they're getting paid the same, a fair wage. I don't understand the wage of restaurant employees or like other service people. It should just be one flat minimum wage regardless of what you do.
Why tipping is getting out of hand. You guys have to tip for watching this the video.
When was the last time you purchased something and you weren't asked for a tip? Yeah.
I got this drink at the store. It was like fucking like a dollar, like 70 something, and they didn't ask me for a tip. And then before that, I went to Culver's last night with my dad. There's a viewer that saw me there, and he came up and said hi, and he said that he got transferred to, like, some military base here, and this is like my dad's fucking trap card. The second that he said military, my dad starts talking to him about tanks, and this guy's like, yeah, all right, I'll see you later. And my dad's like, hold up. So what's been going on? So how are the tanks? And he spends like an hour, not an hour, like 40 minutes talking to this dude about tanks and guns and military stuff, to the point to where the people that were working there came to our table and were like, you have to leave. We're closed. Get out. And my dad ate a sandwich in the fucking car. But yeah, he was talking about a lot. It was funny.
I can't remember
yesterday.
either.
We didn't tip though.
Tipping culture has gotten out of control.
Yeah.
I get up to the pay window and she's like, how much do you want to tip? What am I going to tip you for? I'm in the drive-thru. Oh my God.
Tips have been on the rise for decades. During the 1950s, people commonly tipped 10% of the bill. By the 1970s and 1980s, that jumped to 15%.
Jesus.
Today, people tip anywhere from 15 to 25%.
That is crazy.
According to one 2020.
I mean, for me, here's what I do, right? Is like, I'm fucking rich. I just hit the biggest number. I'll always tip them a bunch of money because I don't care. I don't give a fuck. It's whatever. However,
Rich guy take.
nobody should ever have to tip for anything. Do not engage in a financial contract with an employer if the employer is not giving you adequate wages.
Yeah.
Nobody should ever have to tip. Do not.
I mean, easier said than done coming from someone who's found considerable wealth as a result of dedicating to themselves on a risk. Like, some people can't afford that risk, unfortunately. I totally agree that with the perspective. However, reality is reality. Some people just can't afford to do that. So, like, really, rather than putting it on the prospective employee to decide, oh, this isn't a fair wage, so I'm not going to apply, someone's going to take that job regardless. What needs to happen is regulation needs to come in from the government and say, we're not allowing tipping anymore. You're paying your employees minimum wage. And if you don't like it, don't own a restaurant.
Not let anybody ever, some fucking upper middle class loser, tell you that if you can't afford to tip, you can't afford to eat out. Fuck that. If you want to go out and you want to get yourself a nice meal and you don't have the money to tip, do it and enjoy it. There's nothing wrong with that.
Survey, consumers said they tipped more than 21% on average.
Yep.
Nowadays,
I used to never tip. Like, never. I would never tip for anything.
are people who argue 20% is kind of a cheap tip.
I would debate. I mean, like, I've been in a position where I didn't give a tip because I was potentially dissatisfied with the service. And people who have worked in the service industry as waiters, including myself, would probably be pretty pissed to hear something like that. But it shouldn't be our responsibility to pay an employee's wages just because we decided to go to a certain establishment. Like, if the net result is going to be, oh, I'm going to, like, put this person on my hit list so the next time they come in, I'm going to spit in their food. Like, people are just going to decide, I don't want to come here anymore. And the restaurant as a whole suffers. The business doesn't thrive. And if you want your business to thrive, pay your employees fairly, and they'll know that they have a job so long as they keep performing at a decent level. Like, you don't have to be an all-star, like, 3-star Michelin restaurant and be like bow tie, dressed to the nines waiter to earn a decent wage. You just have to bring the food from the kitchen to the table. And I mean, I was just in I was in a restaurant yesterday getting falafel, and it's like a fast food joint, but you order the food, you sit down, and they bring it to you, and they don't ask for a tip at all. That's just part of, like, what they decided to do. Is like, oh, here's your food, we brought it to you. Like, you didn't have to stand at the counter and wait for your number to be called or something like that. They bring it right to the table. That's just service. That's just like... The culture in North America is very warped, and ever since I've moved to the EU, I've come to discover, like, yes, things can operate this way. I always knew it, but I never experienced it until now.
While the percentage that consumers are tipping at full-service restaurants in the past couple of years has remained about the same, in the fourth quarter of 2022, the number of tips provided at full-service restaurants grew 17%. Meanwhile, the tip frequency...
I think, like...
The thing is, I also worked at a fast food burrito place. I've had a lot of jobs. And when I worked there was an option for tipping and a tip jar. And I always thought, like, why do we have a tip jar? Why is our debit machine asking for tips? All we did was put toppings on the burrito. We should be expected to do that properly. And if we don't, then the person gets their burrito for free or something like that, or discounted, or you get a coupon to come back, like some sort of compensation that way. But there shouldn't be this, like, oh, did I put enough lettuce and black beans? Did I put enough of the protein you ordered onto the burrito, and therefore you're going to pay me a little extra? Like, no, this is a fast food joint. Why would I ask for that? I'm never going to ask for tips. And I remember my manager asking me to, like, remind them that there's a tipping option. I'm not gonna fucking do that. I'm like, okay, Sarah, no problem. And then I turn around and just keep doing my work.
I mean, really, that's probably because of, like, COVID, because people have the mindset, well, like, if you're out here dying just to make sure I have a taco, yeah, I can slide you another $1. It's fine. Not a big deal. So I think that's what happened.
Quick service restaurants such as coffee shops and fast food chains rose 16% during the same time period.
What we're seeing now nationwide is something that is known as tipflation. At every opportunity, we're being presented with a tablet that's asking us how much we'd like to tip.
That was a porn
In many
category.
cases, not only replacing the old-fashioned tip jars that you could feel good about throwing some spare change into, but actually suggesting tip amounts, often right in front of the employee receiving that tip.
Oh, the worst part is whenever there's not a no tip button, it's just a custom button and you have to enter a 0.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so
Most of the
annoying.
time.
Not to mention also your dinner date and the dozen or so people standing behind you in line.
Yeah.
And I know people who have worked in the service industry, and every time we've had the conversation, I don't out loud say like, you know, I don't often tip or I tip this amount. Like they tell me, oh, every time I go out and I tip, like I've been there, so I tip them like $50. And I'm like, geez, that's nice. I don't like to burn my money for no reason, so I'm not going to do that.
It's gone beyond just the tablets. The other day I was using the Hopper app to book a hotel, and it wasn't until I confirmed my payment that I realized my hotel was $10 more expensive. It turns out Hopper assumed I wanted to add a tip, and I had to go back to a prior page in order to opt out.
I think that tipping is only bad if it's not included in the payment. Like for example, I think mandatory or like for example, if you go out somewhere, how many of you guys have like ever been out like to like a really fucking expensive restaurant or like
There was a time when I went to my best friend's father's birthday, and like it was a really nice Italian restaurant, and all his family was there, so they had to like reserve a space for maybe like 20 people. And I remember being told that gratuity was built like into the receipt. So like based on what you ordered, a percentage of that was just automatically opt-in, like you're paying a tip. Like, I mean, just the presumption that, oh, you're going to give us more money because. Like, work that into your price and have it trickle down in an even split to all of your employees in the form of a fair working wage.
like out to a club, and if you're over, I think it's like usually $1,000, it's like a 20%
Yeah,
gratuity
like bottle
gets added
service at
onto
a
your
bar.
check. I actually think that's totally fine. Yeah, 4K hotel. No, I'm not talking about 4K hotel. I'm talking about like, yeah, you spend $1,000. Yeah, that's standard. I actually think that's totally fucking fine because that's established before you spend any money.
Tipflation refers to not just that we're tipping more, but we're tipping everyone for everything.
You're being guilted into tipping on something that is not.
Everything.
You're being guilted into tipping on something that is not technically a service. It's someone simply doing their job.
Right.
In those situations, consumers are feeling.
Well, all of the services are people doing their job because their job is to perform the service.
Yeah.
Like whenever a waiter brings you a glass of water or brings you their food, or your food, excuse me, that's their job. If the waiter wasn't giving people their food, they would be out of the building.
Yeah. That's the thing.
Resentful.
It's one thing to provide a tip because you notice somebody stand out and do something above and beyond the call of duty. But 99% of the time, that's not what people are tipping for. They're tipping for just because somebody asked the question and you put them on the spot, and some people are too afraid to say no or are afraid of like the social repercussions of being a non-tipper or something like that. Meanwhile, people in other nations have had it figured out for years. Let's pay our people fairly and not ask a dumb question like tipping.
Where do you draw the line?
Yeah. The problem is that the public is not the problem is that in the US there is such a, it's kind of weird, but like there's, usually this isn't the case, but like there's a lot of like people that look down on the people that don't tip as like assholes or bad people or something like that.
They're not.
But what I hope that you have to realize is that the people that don't tip, a lot of the reasons why they don't tip, it's because they don't have any money. They don't have that much money. So
they're trying to figure out their own. They're trying to figure out their own standard of living, and you're holding people accountable to help other people's standard of living. And I don't want to dive too deep into this because I don't have the experience of being a woman in the service industry. However, I would argue that a number of female waitresses make more money just automatically compared to male waiters. Like, they just throw extra money at them. I know my sister worked as a service person, and she was killing it with tips. She was making far more than she ever could with a minimum wage job. And it was simply because, you know, oh, I'm in this for the tips. Like, you base your whole livelihood around the tips, which is such a weird way to have a job. Like, I can't relate to being in that position, but I know that for a fact I've been in financially destitute situations where I just couldn't afford to tip, and so I had to like feel this sense of shame and guilt that I couldn't provide a tip. And it's not like I'm going to stand there and give an explanation. I just have to say zero. And then when the person sees the receipt after I left, they're just going to sit back and think, wow, what a fucking asshole.
It's like one of the only times in society where it's socially acceptable to look down and shame people for being poor.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unironic poor shaming. So eat at home? Well, why would you eat at home if you could go out and they have the food there? I don't understand. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. It's really weird. Yeah, I know. Because you can't tip? Well, why would you?
Like, there are actually people who are totally in agreement with this mentality. As I'm looking at the chat, it's like, why would you eat at home when there's food out? I agree. Like, you want to be social. You want to go out with your friends and grab a meal. You're not basing that decision around, can I afford to tip or not? And then someone just said, because you can't afford to tip. So you can't afford to socialize? You're not allowed in the restaurant unless you're a tipping person? Are we going to take that a step further and say, oh, you can't go out to eat food unless you're able to tip a minimum of 15%? Like, are we just going to start restricting the debit terminals so that 15% is worked into the bill, and if you can't afford to pay that, then you're stealing? You got to wash the dishes to pay your bill?
Well, why would
Ridiculous.
you not? Well, I mean, it's not like you have to tip to go inside. I mean, they still give you food if you don't tip. Yeah, what do you mean? Why would you not do that? It doesn't make sense. We have another person in chat, very smart person. Somebody says, what about streamers getting tipped for doing literally bullshit, giving entertainment? Is it on Twitch to pay you? Yes, actually, as a matter of fact, it is on Twitch to pay me. And there are multiple cases of streamers complaining on being not tipped for things, and they've all been shit on. Two examples of those are Invader Vi and also Bad Bunny. So I understand you think you're smart. You're not. But you think that. Hopefully now you've learned something. It's just not true. It's stupid.
TIP stands for to ensure
idiot,
promptness. Tipping may go back as far as the Roman era, but according to most experts, the practice likely has its origins in medieval Europe.
Noblemen taking passage on roads would throw coins to the rubble to ensure safe passage.
It's ironic that it originated in medieval Europe. And so now most countries you go in Europe don't have tipping as part of their culture. When you go to a restaurant, you don't have to tip. So it makes me think that it was brought over to North America by the British and then just extrapolated to the nth degree and has now worked its way, you know, it's a parasite that's festered and become a part of almost every transaction you do, even when, you know, like the lady said in the drive-thru, there's literally nothing performed besides taking the food from where it was prepared and handing it. And I'm supposed to tip for that? Because if I didn't tip, then you wouldn't hand me the food?
One theory is that it evolved in eating and drinking establishments as a way to forestall envy. That when you're eating and drinking, you're having fun, and the people who are serving you are not.
Fast forward to the 19th century, when waiters who received a full wage went on strike demanding higher wages, they were replaced with women who employers could pay less.
My man.
And I didn't want to make it a gender thing, but of course, when you're talking about this time when patriarchy was at its height, of course, it was a question of bringing in people who weren't treated fairly so that they could be paid less.
It is, brother. History's repeating itself. Now instead of women, we got Flippy doing it. There we go.
A decade later, there was the population of newly freed slaves. The idea from these restaurant owners was that they were...
How is the foundation of tipping being okay? That, well, we had women as second-class citizens, and then we freed the slaves who were kind of even below that, and so that's how tipping started. Like, this sounds really bad.
Giving the luxury or privilege of a white person's tips.
Oh my
that was
God!
Without a full wage.
Ironically, as tipping exploded in the United States,
wow.
it became less common in Europe and was replaced with service charges.
While the first federal minimum wage law was passed in 1938, it wasn't until almost 3 decades later when the tip minimum wage was established. In 1991, the federal minimum wage for tipped employees was set at $2.13, which is what it remains at as of March 2023.
That seems like...
Wait, really? Whoa. I didn't actually know that. The US is so messed up. I'm just an ignorant Canadian who didn't realize that. Like, even in Canada, there is a tipped employee's wage, if you will. Like, when you work in a restaurant, minimum wage right now is, I think, $15 Canadian. And I think if you work in a restaurant, it's something like $9 per hour. But $2.13, even in Canadian dollars, that's like $4.
It doesn't keep up. That seems like it's not keeping up with inflation. Man.
But I think it's kept this way because of what I was alluding to earlier. When people are operating off of tips, yes, there are some people who are ridiculed for not giving tips, but I think more often than not, you're getting at least an average of 15% with those odd, wealthy people who either pick the biggest number or drop some large amount. And that is more than enough, more than an average minimum wage employee. So why would the business continue to pay on top of that? However, I think if you all of a sudden took away tips as a means of pay and you started paying every employee minimum wage, a bunch of waitresses would quit their jobs. I almost guarantee that.
Let's see how much it would be.
Wage was established in 1991.
1991. Okay, so how much would it be now? I did this before. Hopefully we'll do this one right here. Okay, so $2.13. And then we're going to look at, let's just do January of 1991. And now. $4.76. So it would be almost double.
And the federal minimum wage for tipped employees was set at $2.13, which is what it remains at as of March 2023.
As far as I know,
That's
the
depressing.
United States is the only country that exempts tipped workers from having to receive the full minimum wage.
Isn't it great? Hell yeah, brother. That's right.
In 43 states, it is legal to pay tipped workers less than the standard minimum wage because tips presumably make up that difference.
Of course.
Well, they make up more than that difference. I want to see the statistics that show what the average waitress makes on tips alone. And it's probably more than minimum wage. I shouldn't say the average waitress. Some waitresses just constantly get screwed by RNG, random number generator. I don't know why I'm saying it that way, but you know what I mean. It's a roll of the dice. Some people get very fortunate. Maybe some celebrity comes in and drops like $20,000 as a tip. Like you hear those stories. But for the most part, you're still either breaking even with the minimum wage thing by doing the tipping culture. So it's more sensible for the business owner to not be paying wages on top of that, because then the restaurant probably closes down. They probably have to forego expenses on a lot of things that actually help the restaurant run. What I'm saying is that all of this should be calculated ahead of time, paying minimum wage, not allowing tips, like what you have to do to operate the business, including paying a fair wage. And if you can't afford that, then the restaurant closes, which is pretty crappy. But, you know, then you got to work with banks and try to find an affordable loan. But then I think affordable loan in America, yeah, right. There's just not a good solution. But I just know that the tipping culture thing is very toxic.
In recent years, you might have found yourself asking, do I tip this barista for pouring that hot coffee? What about when I'm going to a restaurant and picking up takeout?
No.
And how much
Yeah.
do I tip that doorman, driver, or dog walker?
No.
When those in the service industry were feeling the brunt during the coronavirus pandemic, consumers started tipping for things they never had before.
Yeah.
And the percentage of remote transactions when tipping was an option in which the consumer tipped soared from about 46% before the pandemic to around 86% in January 2022.
Jesus.
If people were willing to tip the person delivering food to their home 30%,
Why? Because of the whole, like, support your local businesses?
why not ask if they'd like to tip when they come pick up?
During the pandemic, businesses who
Yeah, tip Chipotle for putting your food on the fucking counter for all the takeout food. Yeah, you want to give us $5 extra for putting your food on the counter?
lost
And some
a lot
suckers will
of
pay that.
traditional customers and transactions were looking for alternative ways to make up that income. And if asking for tips was one way to do it, they were willing to try it.
And since then, that ask hasn't dissipated. Another reason consumers say they feel pressured to tip more? They're being asked to tip prior to service completion.
Asking for a tip beforehand is almost like a bribe,
Yeah, it is.
right? I'm afraid not to tip because
You're going to mess up my
you
food.
do less good work.
Customers
Absolutely, that's what they would do.
Yeah.
And I see memes about this all the time.
The only exception to that rule, if you're going through like food ordering services, I think is Uber Eats, where like they'll ask you to give a tip ahead of time, but then based on how the delivery went, you have the opportunity to change it, which again is one of those like putting you on the spot pressure moments. especially if you happen to be in an area where there's not a lot of people doing that, and therefore you might get the same delivery person again. They might remember the address that they delivered to where they got stiffed on a tip. It's just not a good way to be. There's food delivery services here, and I don't think there's a tipping situation involved. I think the food delivery people just get paid based on like the distance they have to travel.
Which is ironic because that's where they said tipping came from. Is it was fucking noblemen and like these guys that throw the coins on the ground so nobody will attack them whenever they're trying to cross the bridge. So we've actually come full circle. There you go.
Might not be concerned about the barista's perception of their tip before getting their latte, but what about the mechanic repairing your car? I don't know about you, but I'm certainly going to make sure to tip them well to ensure my safety.
That's
People
messed
with
up,
too much
though.
money.
Another reason consumers are tipping more, newer technologies. Kiosks.
Somebody said, should I tip the pilot to make sure that they land the plane? That's kind of funny. I mean, that's a scenario in which the pilot is also at risk. But I mean, it's a funny illustration of the point. Like, there's so many things where people should just be doing their job because they have integrity and they care about doing a good job, regardless of what role they're playing.
And tablets with 3 large tipping suggestions that pop up on the screen in front of you.
Yep.
3 options
I've seen this
chosen
before.
by the business.
Yeah.
I have not yet been to the restaurant where they recommend 5, 10, or 15% for
It's
quick
usually
takeout.
10, 20,
it
or
normally
25.
always starts at 15 as a bare minimum, sometimes even starting at 20, 25, and up to 30.
Really?
According to a 2022 creditcards.com survey, 22% of respondents said when they're presented with various suggested tip
I mean,
amounts,
that's like a 100% tip. You spend $2, you tip $2. Like, I mean, fuck.
they feel pressured to tip more than they normally would.
Yeah.
They use those options as an
Well, it's social pressure, and if you give in to the social pressure, you lose your fucking money. This is only going to stop whenever people stop giving into it.
Yeah.
But because people are so fucking desperate for approval, then they don't stop doing it. People could get rid of tipping culture overnight. If everybody just decided to stop tipping at certain places, it would go away.
Well, then you say at certain places. So what are the certain places where you should be tipping? Because I still think that a waitress or waiter bringing your food to the table is not something that should be praised with money. That's just part of their job. That's like the primary component. They take the order and they bring the order.
But they don't do it because they're too afraid of the social consequence. That's what it is. They're fucking slaves to approval.
indication of kind of what the normative range is and feel compelled to tip within that range. So the more you ask, the more you get.
Yeah, of course.
The 3 prominent companies with that trendy, sleek look are Square, Toast, and Clover. They launched a bit more than a decade ago to help businesses run smarter, faster, and easier, all in one point of sale or POS systems. In some cases, fewer fees so it's less of a burden to accept multiple credit cards, no long-term contracts, and multiple other useful tools including inventory and employee management.
Sure.
They got credit card processing into the hands of individuals and very small merchants. Square did a great job. It's been a tremendous growth story. That's half of the business today.
Do you think these companies are responsible for this turn of events that we've seen with tipping?
I would say they could take some of the credit for help.
No, it's not the company's fault. You can't blame somebody for saying, "Hey, do you want to give me $5?" And you're like, "Yeah, okay." "Hey, how about 10? You want to give me $10?" And you're like, okay, I guess. And then now it's their fault for asking you for 15? No, it's the customer.
Yeah.
It's the customer's fault because they put up with it.
Restaurants.
People are saying he's wrong, but he's right. It's a simple answer. No, I'm not going to pay extra when I'm already paying what I consider to be a high rate of cost because I'm enjoying the luxury of not finding the resources and preparing this meal on my own. Like, it already comes at a premium. So why are you then being further bullied into having to pay even more to help compensate for those costs? Like, it's built into the price from the start.
Gather more tips.
Robert Sanchez manages Eli's Essentials in New York City. One of the business's locations uses Toast, while the other uses this. He says the storefront that uses Toast sees more and higher tips.
The Clover, Square, and Toast terminals to a consumer are very easy to use. Big buttons, big areas to sign the tip.
Oh, yeah.
An easy way to tip a different amount if you don't like the starting at 20% option. There are others.
Oh yeah, they have this one at Sonic, like Sonic, not Sonic the Hedgehog, the fucking hot dog place, and like I click the no tip button, and it doesn't do anything. Yeah, it doesn't do anything. There's like nothing that happens at all. It's just crazy, man. Sonic is dead. Yeah, it's like you click on it and it doesn't finish the transaction. It just acts like you didn't hit a button, so maybe you hit the tip button after that.
Do it. They're just not
Weird.
as cool looking.
We've come a long way from being able to just throw your spare change into the jar by the cash register.
Yep.
The new tablets have turned what used to be a sin of omission, I simply didn't put money into the tip jar, into a sin of commission. I have to hit a button and say no tip. I have to actively choose not to tip. Whereas before, not tipping was a kind of a passive thing.
Glancing at the tip jar could have also been a way to get a sense of how many others are tipping on that service and maybe even how much money.
Right.
Meanwhile, not only can the tipping options be customized, but the tipping feature can be disabled as well. So it's the merchant's choice to ask or not to ask for tips.
You can't blame them for asking. Like, I don't
No.
think you should blame them for asking. I think that's ridiculous. I think that people need to be held accountable for their own actions. And at a certain point, you can't blame.
It's annoying, but at the same time, the feature exists. You're kind of a fool of a business person if you don't include it as part of the payment flow, because other businesses are doing it. So who are you to not? So at the end of the day, the onus gets put back on the individual to hit the no tip button. But yeah, you could take the blame farther back and say whoever invented this app, whether it's Toast or Square or whomever, you know, they shouldn't have incorporated that as part of it. But they're taking a cut of the total transaction. And so by adding tips, they're just inflating their cut.
People for seeking money and trying to get a tip for something. Like, how is it that, like, you're doing something? How is it not the... I really hate this because it's like, this is like, so it's their fault. Like, the world needs to change because you feel insecure about not tipping? This is the weirdest, like, what the fuck is this? It's so obnoxious, man. There's no need to get tip. I don't get it. Like, it's just that they... Fuck. You're just... What's this here? You're just wrong? Wait, no, I'm not. Classic Asmon arguing for the exploiter. I'm not arguing for the exploiter. What I'm saying is that, like, there's such a massive spectrum of this that you can never actually have any legislation or any ruling on this that was going to make any sense, because you can look at tipping as a million different things.
Yeah.
So for a million different services, because a lot of things that people do are services. It's impossible to, like, really draw a line anywhere. It's up to the individual to draw their own line.
The business side, it makes employees want to perform better and do a better job.
And maybe that's the case. It makes people want to do a better job. However, I worked installing fiber internet for homes in residential neighborhoods. And I remember just doing the best that I could no matter where I was, answering questions, being punctual, you know, giving the full introduction on how to use the service to the best of people's abilities. And there were times when people just offered me a tip. And like, we're not supposed to. It was a company policy that we're not supposed to take tips, but yeah, I'm going to take the tip. What the heck? It's not built into the flow. I didn't ask for it. This person is going out of their way to reward me for doing a good job because I went above and beyond. I didn't ask the question. They just said, "Hey, would you like this?" And I'm like, "Thank you so much. Like, I'm so grateful. Like, if you have any questions, here's my work number. You know, feel free to shoot me a call and leave me a message and I'll get back to you." It was that casual a thing because I was only responsible for a certain neighborhood, so I was willing to do that. I was just trying to be nice. And so the idea that people are only willing to do their job well if they're being rewarded above and beyond their normal wage, like, I should just be paid a normal wage. I shouldn't have the expectation of getting extra reward and therefore work to a degree of excellence, you know, which is totally subjective. It should just be a matter of doing what's required.
Job.
Of course
It's
it does.
seriously significant.
They get more
really
money.
pays for the software. You'd be a foolish business owner
Yeah.
not to install it based on what the numbers display.
Yeah.
Even a mammoth company.
Yeah, every company is going to do this. It's smart to do it because you make more money. You're going to make money just because people are so fucking afraid of being shamed on Twitter. It's so pathetic. What a pathetic society. Oh my God.
Yeah, I totally
Just
disagree with
Starbucks
tipping.
has decided that they need to sink or swim, and the
Yeah.
best way for them to do that is to offer the tip screen.
Starbucks rolled out the tipping feature in stores in September 2022.
It's one thing to have a happy staff. It's another thing to have customers that are feeling resentful. I think it's a calculus that
Yeah, of
all
course it
business
is.
owners really need to make.
What's the tipping point of tipping?
Do you think that they're somewhat going to start seeing that they're getting lower tips because people are paying tips to so many services, or they're
I think that people will start doing lower tips now because
Yeah.
COVID's not as big of a thing. As I said, I think that there was a lot of people that went into tipping in like 2021 or somewhere around there as like, okay, you're threatening to die by making sure that I get a taco. Yeah, I'll give you $1. It's fine. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, you mean risking death, not threatening to die. That was a funny way of putting it. But I mean, even then, the fact that businesses were probably in general having lower turnouts, like a lot of restaurants were closing as a result of COVID. So people were trying to do their part and almost donate more to help the restaurant cover its operating fees that it normally would be able to if it was servicing people outside the restaurant in addition to having people inside of the restaurant. But if they're just operating as pure takeout, like, that's a huge toll on their overall yearly revenue.
Sure. But I think after COVID's over, now that COVID is over, less people are going to feel compelled to tip. I think that just makes sense.
resentful of the act of tipping in general?
I think that's a very real danger of servers in a sit-down restaurant. They were greatly affected during and immediately post-pandemic by restaurants doing all sorts of fees. Their tips were actually going down because consumers were saying, well, if I'm paying for the health insurance and I'm paying for inflation and I'm paying for this and I'm paying for that, enough is enough. The more you levy these line items onto consumers, guess who's being penalized? It's the one area that's still quasi-discretionary, which is the tip.
I went door to door.
Yeah, I ordered a fucking pizza. I was like at a meeting and I was like, well, I need something to eat. I can't leave because I'm at the meeting. So I did a door to, I hate fucking ordering food, but I will order food if I literally cannot leave where I need to be at. And it was like after my my podcast, and I ordered a pizza and it said it was $24. Guess how much it was?
What?
That's right, $43.
What the hell?
Surprise. Oh, surprise, $43. How about that? Can you fucking believe that shit? It's like twice as much money. It was 2 pizzas, to be fair. Like each pizza was like $12. And I got 2 pizzas.
Talking with waitresses, bartenders, and baristas, and
Miz just like fucking puts his hand over the top pizza, just starts eating it. And like, to be fair, I would let him have a piece. But yeah, he immediately ate half of one of the pizzas. That's why I always get 2.
while they wanted to remain anonymous, they told me it's happening already.
Hilarious.
With inflation and being prompted for tips left and right, they say customers have already started to tip less and sometimes not at all.
There you go.
A 2022 study found that 17% of Americans are tipping less because of inflation.
Smart.
However, 10% report tipping more. At the same time, more than half of
Not
Americans,
smart.
or 60%, want to do away with tipping entirely. The extent of pandemic-influenced generosity has also gone down. 43%.
Yeah, that's a comforting statistic. More than half of the people in the US just don't want to be doing tipping. And I'm sure if you had them exaggerate on or extrapolate on that statement, it would be because the restaurant should be paying a fair wage. There shouldn't be this like $2.13 of a federal minimum wage. That's ridiculous.
Of consumers typically tipped servers 20% or more in 2022, compared to 56% of consumers in 2021.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the average tip for full-service restaurants has gone down only slightly during the same time period. According to Toast, 19.6% in the fourth quarter of 2022, compared to 19.8%
lot of money.
in 2021. However, according to surveys conducted in those same years, respondents said they're tipping higher percentages, 21.2% and 18.9% respectively.
It can genuinely hurt the people who truly, truly rely on gratuities for their livelihood. I firmly believe that the tipping invasion we're experiencing right now, I think it's a net negative for society.
Well, I think the
Yeah,
whole
of
thing
course.
is a negative. I think the entire idea that we have conditioned a group of people socially that we need to shame each other for not making up the lost wages that employers refuse to pay their employees. This is insane. Absolutely fucking crazy that this is even a consideration. I don't know how we got here. That people just accept this.
Yeah.
That and they just shame each other. They're shitting on each other because, oh, you're not giving enough money. You're not tipping enough money. Bro, you know who should be tipping them?
I remember even being in like high school and we would all go out to a restaurant and we're trying to split the bill. And part of splitting the bill was splitting the tip. And like everybody had a different sense of how much they would want to tip. But instead we kind of just had to go with the biggest number on the table and then all of us split that. So we're tipping like 20% of our bill, which part of that bill was inflated because one person ordered a meal that was like $20, another person ordered a meal that was like $10. So it wasn't really fair, but you just kind of ate it because societal pressure. You don't want to seem like a cheapskate.
The money? The fucking manager. Especially whenever you're tipping money for good food. The waiter didn't even make the fucking food.
Yeah.
Some
Where's
of
the
them
chef
share
getting-
the tips, not all of them do.
Yeah.
It's just so insane. I just lose my fucking mind. Yeah, let me tell you. Yeah, give a 20 to the chef, okay? Yeah, you came by twice and you refilled my drink. No, you're not getting $17.
And with that tablet at just about every counter, no matter where you go, the question is,
That you know, it's funny he says you came by twice and filled my drink. There's also the opposite effect where someone who's so reliant on tips starts going over and above, where they're like, so how is the food? And it's like, I haven't had a bite yet, but I'll let you know. And then they come back, they're like watching like a hawk from the corner because maybe it's not too busy. And then they'll come swing back around like, oh, so I see you had a little taste. How is it going? Like, that's annoying. Like, that's how you lose your tip with someone like me. It's like, maybe I'm a piece of shit. I'm sure there are people who might come across this and they're just going to be like, wow, okay, this guy does not like tipping. But I'm sure there are a lot of people who share my sentiment where it's just like, leave me alone. I ordered the food, you brought it to me. I'm thankful. Now let me carry on in peace. So, you know, there's a point at which it's having the opposite effect that's intended. Like, yeah, it's going to make people work harder and better and provide better service. In other cases, not.
Where's the tipping point? I'm wondering how long before I'm tipping my doctor after an annual physical.
If you want to seem especially generous after an exceptional meal, you might decide to go big and tip 30%. But it's a cycle. As more people seeking to make a good impression then up their tips to 30%, maybe even 35%, what becomes a generous tip?
I have to believe tips are going to go up from where they are today.
Of course.
But
of course they're going to go up. And here's another reason why they want to go up, is because people want to appear wealthy.
Yeah.
They don't want to look like a broke bitch. So not only are you being shamed, but you also have your ego to hold up. And I'm going to be honest. I don't feel bad for these people at all. If you want to be a slave to social approval from fucking losers, go ahead and tip 50%. It's not my problem.
Yeah.
I don't care. At a certain point, you need to fucking be accountable for what you're doing with your fucking money. How is this even
I mean, you say you don't care, but then you're also picking the biggest option on the tipping thing because now you're wealthy. So, I mean, yeah, you don't care, but you're also trying to help out the little guy, which is good intentions, but at the same time is somewhat egotistical. Maybe I'm wrong, but I would argue that you're doing it because you know how it feels to be poor, and so you want to be like the hero. You're like making the day of this person who's probably not making a whole lot of money, and then you're giving them like a nice tip. You know, there's a bit of ego behind that.
a question?
I also think there's got to be a logical ceiling somewhere. I just don't know where it is.
Yeah, there's got to be a ceiling. I mean, I'm sure people thought the ceiling was already a place that we're past now, so I don't really know about that.
Yeah, we broke the ceiling,
etc. Let me read a few comments about this. I know tipping is always a very divisive topic, which is why I thought I would watch this video. There's a lot of people that don't really say what I say because it's like, I think it's like kind of mean, or it's seen as like, oh, like it's a fucking rich streamer that says don't tip people. Yeah, I don't think you should have to tip. That's right. It's the same thing with streams. You can watch a stream, like fucking stolen laptop, McDonald's Wi-Fi, filled the water cup up with soda, fucking stole the fucking guy's fries that are next to you. You're watching the stream with ad block on, gifted sub. You can do whatever you want, man. I don't give a fuck because I'll eventually make money and it's not up to you. Your job is simply to entertain, to be entertained. And if I decide to do something that is too much in the favor of like money or whatever, and people don't like it, then they don't have to watch it. That's the free market. And isn't it fucking great? That is so, like, imagine if we didn't have that. Imagine if you had to pay money to watch a fucking stream. Number one, nobody'd watch any fucking streams. And number two, it would suck. So yeah, of course this would be awful. So yeah, ad block culture, yeah. And again, like, I think that the real problem with this kind of stuff is the fact that there isn't a monetization structure. Because like I think ad block is different than tipping in a way, but with tipping especially, I do really think that they should at least pay the employees a livable wage. I hate the idea that, oh, well, you have to tip because these people aren't making minimum wage. Why aren't they making minimum wage?
I mean, I almost want to take the discussion a step further. Because it can be really hard to find work and find work that you're good at. And if a country is going to go into debt and make decisions about like the social welfare of its people, I think it's almost fair that, there be some kind of universal income so that even when you're in that unemployment stage and you're trying to find work, like, yes, you should be held the task on trying to find work and contributing to society, but you also shouldn't have to worry about putting food on the table and having to take these desperation jobs that don't reward you fairly, that force you to have to rely solely on tips as a means of income. There should be some kind of universal minimum wage that exists, even if you're in that struggling state. And then if you find yourself in a position where you're able to work a great job and earn more than that, fantastic. But now I'm just starting to sound like a socialist.
Like, why? Like, have we ever asked this? Like, why? This seems like a bad idea. Just make the food more expensive on the menu. Oh yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Just make the food. Yeah, I think so. Employers are required by law to make up the difference, so they are making minimum wage. Yes, I know that's true, but it's probably a big pain in the ass, and I don't really know what the difference is. But the point is that I think that they should just be required to pay minimum wage as a default. And I think that would solve, I think, a lot of the tipping problems. Because people feel like they're obligated to tip to subsidize the fact that this multi-billion-dollar corporation isn't willing to pay a livable wage for, $10 an hour versus $3 an hour.
Right.
No, it's so fucking annoying, man. Prices would go up.
Even then, $10 an hour isn't a livable wage. You need more than that. But yeah, prices will go through the roof. Sales will suffer. Like, I know where that person's going. And it's true. So, we need to make those decisions and have that societal shift. And then businesses will have to make an adjustment somewhere. And, fingers crossed, the adjustment is that CEOs who are making billion-dollar salaries have to take some cuts. But I think we all know that's not going to happen.
Go up drastically or restaurants would die. You think prices would go up drastically? I don't really think so, personally. I think that there's a lot of expenses in restaurants, and I think that if you increase the prices, it's the same. Like, you can make that same argument with minimum wage. Like, minimum wage has gone up, food has gone up. Yes, it has, but like, that's just what happens. And also, like, I dislike the foundation of that argument and like what's behind it. So the foundation of that argument is that, well, if we pay somebody and
if we have to pay employees more, then suddenly we have to charge more because we can't afford to pay them. It's like, no, you're just putting too much money into the wrong things and rewarding big executives.
Ethical amount of money, a livable wage, we are no longer financially viable. Well, hey, if you can't afford to pay somebody a minimum wage that's fucking livable, maybe you don't deserve to be financially viable.
Right. You shouldn't be running that business. That's what I said earlier.
Maybe you don't deserve that. Maybe you shouldn't have to. You maybe shouldn't be able to. That's what happens.
You can't run the business. That's an expense that you need to account for.
Yeah, there's no restaurants outside of the U.S. Yeah, true. That's it. We are the only place that have any. What's this here? The Moo Kitty video exposing streamers and her whole channel got demonetized. Yeah, I heard a little bit about that. I thought that she, like, I don't know. It seemed like she was the kind of person that would just, like, farm hate on people, but I didn't really look into it that much, so I didn't talk about it or anything. It's just, like, my first impressions. So I don't know. First bad take from you? Thank God. Okay, let's go ahead and address this. Let's see what the bad take is. Okay, good. We're going to go through one of these people, and then we're going to move on.
Oh, boy.
Okay. Let's go. Yep, all right. Let's see. Percentage is based off results. Treat me right, I treat you right. Respect is earned in a situation, but have respect for the workers if you work. The court of public opinion. Oh, this is something else. Texas must be a slum if you can afford a home at minimum wage. Problem is there's. So what's the problem here? Yeah, I'm just confused. Yeah, I actually don't know what.
I don't know why he says my first bad take from you, but the problem is the difference between it's cut off, but livable and minimum wage. Yeah, that's kind of what I was alluding to as well, is if someone's getting paid $3 versus $10, like the $10 still doesn't cover it. So a livable wage is what people need to be paid.
I have no idea.
Oh, the difference between
tipping is considered rude in Japanese culture. There you go. Minimum wage isn't enough, he's saying. That's a separate conversation. If minimum wage isn't enough, then you should raise the minimum wage. Also, every single individual who works at a company has willingly engaged in a contract between them and their employer. Nobody is entered into this contract without knowing how much they're going to get paid in like a lot of these cases. This isn't a secret. This isn't a surprise. This person who's working at, let's say they're working at Texas Roadhouse.
And that's fine to say. However, someone who's been through a lot of jobs themselves, it's hard finding work that treats you right, that pays you a decent wage, that makes you feel fulfilled. Like, and I know that's not really the responsibility of business owners to make sure that you're fulfilled, but it is their responsibility to make sure that it's a decent place to work, regardless of what your skills are. And I don't know Zach's work experience. I know that he worked for the IRS in some form in the past. I don't want to make assumptions. I'm just going to preface it with the fact that I'm speculating on what I remember him saying, but I think he said that he got a job with the IRS because his dad worked for the IRS and he was able to work there for a short period. And another time he worked for Sam's Club for a minute. I've had jobs like that where they lasted a month or something like that. And it's just tough to be able to say that from your perspective, because I think a lot of people envy the fact that you won the social lottery and that you're able to be in this position of, being able to say your piece. And it's easier said than done to find a job, like to just turn down an opportunity because, oh, they're not paying me enough, but they're paying me something. Like, it's nice to get something in the door. And then you're being worked to the bone and you come home tired and you don't have that energy left over. You don't have the gas in the tank to start looking for that next thing. People don't have the motivation. People have families that they have to take care of. It's really tough. And I mean, then you can make the argument, well, maybe you shouldn't have had a family then. No comment. I mean, like, I'm not planning to have kids. I understand how much energy and dedication that takes, and I need to figure out my own life still. So, yeah. You can go so far down the rabbit hole with this conversation. It doesn't stop.
And they're getting paid $3 an hour. They signed up to get paid $3 an hour. It's not your fault that they can't read a fucking contract. This is ridiculous. He answered, oh, thank God. Okay, let's see it. You said livable was with minimum wage?
What?
Now this I don't want to get into this. Oh my fucking God. I really don't want to get into this. Oh fuck. This is just so fucking stupid. A livable wage, a minimum wage. Has it ever occurred to you that people's distinction of what a livable wage is different? Like, some people think a livable wage is $25, other people think it's $12. Like, it's based on your standard of living, where you live, the kinds of things you own. Like, yeah. What does this even have? Like, livable wage versus minimum. Who the fuck cares? They should have to pay minimum wage because that's the fucking law. Everything else above that is between the employer and the employee.
It's subjective.
That's not my decision. It's not my problem. It's not enough, then don't take the fucking job.
And I don't know why he's saying first bad take from you when, like, maybe he just misspoke. I didn't even hear the part where he said livable is equal to minimum wage. It's an irrelevant point. We're talking about tipping.
Are you insane?
Yes, probably.
If you don't think that you're making enough money, then don't fucking work there. Jesus Christ. How can people be so dumb? It's usually not that simple. You said livable wage minimum. How? Because people have different standards of living, obviously. Like your standard of living in San Francisco is going to be different than in Nebraska.
Ugh.
That's just naive. No, it's not. Wait. So, I'm not against raising the minimum wage. I'm an advocate of universal basic income. Absolutely.
Universal basic income. I couldn't find the proper terminology, but yes, we are in agreement upon that. Universal basic income would solve so many problems because would people take advantage of it? Would people stay stuck in employment for long periods of time? Yes, perhaps. But then you would create new jobs of people who would help regulate and hold those people accountable to making positive contributions in society. People who have, mental health experience and know how to guide people towards a role that makes them feel fulfilled, that leverages the skills that they care to learn or already have. It would make society better overall, net plus, if you have universal basic income. Some people do want to be in a society where like there's always a loser and bottom feeders and there's people who are like the top 1%. But that's not a stable strategy for long-term happiness of an entire nation. You need to be able to think about what can make the net majority of people happy.
If you work at a job and they're paying you this much money, you agreed to that. You did that.
And you can resign. But then you got bills to pay.
It's not even a question. What are you even talking about? There are no well-paying jobs. People are forced to take insanely dogshit jobs. They have no choice. They need to eat. Yes, because they have no fucking skills, and I know a lot of these fucking people. They don't know anything. They have no education. They have no skills. And guess what? Nobody wants to pay them to do anything because there's not a lot that they can do that creates value. That's the fucking truth. And guess what? Your job is probably going to happen like that too, to automation.
Right.
Just like mine. Just like all of us. It may have happened to, like a fucking factory worker in the 50s, but that doesn't mean it's not going to happen to a programmer in 10 years.
Right.
That's just that's what it is. And whenever it does happen, that skill that you have no longer has value.
Yeah.
Because it can be replaced. It's like somebody that can do math like really well. Who cares? You have a calculator.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy for me to say because I don't want children, but a universal basic income combined with a limit on how many children you can have would long term solve a lot of problems for economies, because some people are having families that they can't afford and are being forced to work jobs out of desperation that barely make ends meet, pinching pennies, rubbing them together, and hoping that they're gonna multiply. Like, it's all an easier said than done situation. But I think there's a lot of things that could be done that just aren't popular.
People are crazy, man. Absolutely crazy. Flippy is replacing you. Yeah, exactly. People without skills don't deserve don't deserve the right to live, though. Oh, I understand that. That's why I think you should have universal basic income. Absolutely. But the truth is that if you want to talk about raising minimum wage, that's fine with me. I have no problem with that. But either way, I think that just in general, you still have to take accountability for what you're doing with your life. Like, you don't wear a raincoat because it's going to...
There's a lot of people who are getting mad about the notion of universal basic income. And I can understand their perspective, but at the same time, they're thinking from a perspective of like, I worked hard to get where I'm at. I don't want someone to just sit on their ass and make the same as me. Like, it's just, it's not thoughtful behavior. It's not considerate behavior of other people's circumstances, what sort of circumstances they were born into, where they're from. Like, sometimes it's just a question of who you know, not what you know. So I mean, that it's silly for people to be upset about that, but I also understand where they're coming from.
Going to rain in a month, are you? No. Like, there are things that are not fair and not right in the world right now, but if you start planning and living your current life about the fact that those things are unfair and you hope they change in the future, the only thing you're doing is sabotaging yourself, and you're living in a fucking delusion. It doesn't matter because you think that things should be different or you believe that the world should be a different way, because it's not, and you have to deal with how things are regardless of how you want them to be. That doesn't mean that how you want them to be isn't true. It doesn't mean that it's not valid. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't work towards that. But it does mean that you can't act one way and then pretend like you're in a different world, because you're not. Jesus. Realism and idealism. Yeah, exactly. You can't say just get more skills. We need people to serve at restaurants, clean the streets. Yes, but the difference is that just get more skills. So you're right. But the truth is, because there are so many people who can do the job of a waiter, the price for it is low.
Right.
If you have
Supply and
something that
demand.
almost nobody can do, you can charge money for it if there is a demand. You understand?
Basic economics.
That's the way things work. So the better you are at something, or the more specialized you are at something, or the fewer people that can do something, the higher the value of that work is.
Yep.
But if the value of the work is just you're moving something around, it's very easy to do. That's why, you know, for example, like these guys that work out in oil rigs get paid six figures and they're 19 years old. Because if you're fucking 30 years old, you probably can't do that fucking job. That job is insane. It's because a very small group of people can do it, and there aren't that many people, so they have to raise the price. That's how it works. Truth hurts. Yeah, it's the fucking truth. And again, you get mad at me all you want, but I'm not wrong. How is it not obvious? It's not obvious to people because they don't want it to be. That's why. They don't want it to be obvious, so they act like it's not true. There you go. An argument to increase wages, make their job livable, what you do through regulation. Yep, absolutely. Raise the minimum wage. Businesses can try to pass the cost to consumer. They'll lose business to the competitor that doesn't. That's right. But standard work is drastically undervalued right now in the majority of jobs currently. Work is undervalued. How can you possibly say that whenever there is no objective measurement for value?
Right.
Like, this is like, I will in general kind of agree with you that I think people should be paid more money, but to make it an objective issue, I don't think so. Productivity, I don't think that's the full picture.
It's a case by case basis.
Value being generated into the economy each year. Yep, that's true. That's very true.
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, it just comes down to this notion of like, people should be paid a livable wage. What does that mean? You have to negotiate that, but there should be room for people to negotiate that. There should be factors, whether it's based on like location or like how many kids you have or who knows what. But then you start ruling yourself out of certain jobs because people are just going to take whoever's the cheapest to help survive. That's why you need the universal basic income, so that people can't make these judgmental factors and everybody can afford to live. And then the skill issue is definitely something that's just always been a problem. You know, for the factory worker during the Industrial Revolution, and things start getting automated, and then you don't need as many factory workers. Like, that's been a problem for a century. So I fear it now as someone who's trying to dedicate themselves to programming at a time where, you know, programming was at a height through the early 2000s and the noughts, but now going into 2020 plus with the forefront of artificial intelligence, there's a huge opportunity for a lot of basic programming to be automated. And you just need someone who can, at a senior level, like address and nitpick all the things that are incorrect or need to just be slightly brushed up or altered from AI, and then the job is done with a much smaller team. So it's interesting to see where that will go, because it's something that I always wanted to be able to do. But I think that what's really going to separate most programmers, if we're going to talk about that, is programmers who have the ability to collaborate, who have the ability to solve problems, communicate well. Those are the programmers that are probably going to thrive in this new environment, whereas those who are just hard stuck on making sure that they're good at coding are probably more replaceable, which is unfortunate. But all right, this video has been long enough. I did a lot of pausing. I turned a 42 minute video into a hour and 20 minute video. It is what it is. All right.